Well, hey everybody, it's Casey J. Cox with the Quarterback Dadcast. We are in season 5, and for those that are watching this on video, thank you for not just listening in your car, but actually going to YouTube or wherever you consume your video podcast. But I'm glad that I did not let the start stop me from changing and trying something new. And so I'm really loving the video aspect. Hopefully, you guys are too. But our next guest is someone that I'm very excited to talk to. I've heard about him and his company for a while, and don't hold this against him, but he is friends with Keith Waitman, a former guest in the podcast that might have teared up, but so did I tear up recently, Keith, on a recent episode, so you can make fun of me too. And also a new friend named Todd Capone. He'll be a future guest, and Todd's a really good friend of our next guest, which his name's Matt Green. He's the Chief Revenue Officer and founder of Sales Assembly, which is a company that I think is doing fantastic work for helping sales teams teach a lot of stuff that doesn't come easy, but they make it look easy. So we're going to learn more about that. He's a Seattle U grad. He's an investor, but more importantly, he's a dad. And we're going to listen to, and learn from Matt how he's working hard to become that ultimate quarterback or leader of his household. So without further ado, Mr. Green, welcome to the Quarterback Dadcast.
Appreciate you having me, Casey. I'm really looking forward to this. Keith has said amazing things about you and about his experience here. So yeah, I'm really excited to join, and thank you for creating this environment for dads to come and jam with each other.
Yeah, it's important. I think it's important that we as dads. I know some men are still stuck in the 1920s where like, you can't cry, you wussy. Yeah. And it's just this rough and tough. But I mean, so last week I'm now a week out from dropping my son off at college, and for the first 2 days, it was like I watched the saddest episode of Punky Brewster every day. Yeah. I mean, just watershed. And I mean, I'm like, I could give two shits. It's like, I mean, I miss my dude, and for all the dads who have gone through it, you know what I'm talking about. For the parents who don't, slow down, enjoy the moments. I know they're cliches, but when you get one that goes out of the house, it's different, everybody. So I would just warn you about that. But anyway, before we get too far into this, we always start each episode with gratitude. So tell me, what are you most grateful for as a dad today?
I'm probably biased. Well, number one, I'm grateful that I am a dad in general. I mean, just that in and of itself is something that, that I'm extremely grateful for. And, if I spend any time with a little bit of self-introspection, it seems to be, and I'm sure, I hope that a good amount of dads feel this way. It's like one of the few things, if not the only thing that I feel as though I was kind of built to do. I think I'm halfway decent at it. So there's that in and of itself. And, my wife and I chat about it all the time. We're extremely grateful that our son is so awesome, right? Now fingers crossed, he just turned 12. And sure, throughout the course of those 12 years, there have been challenges like any other family and any other growing kid. But yeah, so far, net, he's been just a pleasure to be around. So again, fingers crossed it remains that way.
You've kept him out of jail, so you're proud of that, is what you're saying.
So far, yeah. But,
Me too.
That might just be right around the corner. You never know.
If I jinx you, dude, it's so my fault, and I apologize, but I think he's going to be safe. So what I'm grateful for, so we're recording just after Labor Day, everybody. And so my daughter turned 16 in a couple of days. She got a new whip, which she was all loving about. So we got her a nice used, and I just realized what a whip was like 2 years ago, for the record, for the dads at their home. I was like, why would you get a whip? Oh, it's a car. But what I'm grateful for is we had 5 of her closest friends spend time with us in Eastern Washington, and the laughter and this group of girls who are like so eclectic and different interests, and some are athletes, some are not, but it's like it was such a cool something to watch, because like they put all that aside and they just accept each other for who they are, and none of the other stuff matters. And they just had like old school fun, from laughing, from doing stuff in the pool, to just acting like girls, like goofy girls without technology. And just like, it was the coolest moment. My wife and I were just watching, like, man, I don't remember seeing a group of girls like get along this well. Yeah. Even I asked her, I said, right, do you ever have like drama? She's like, no, Dad, zero. It's just like we all, so it's like, I don't know. think that's something to like, I was like, I'm striving for, like, keep surrounding myself with people that make me better, that challenge me to be the best version of me, that put me in spots where I can be vulnerable to say, hey man, I'm struggling, or God, I was a dipshit today, or I didn't like how, like, and they can do that. So it was really neat to just to watch from afar as a dad.
No, that's great to hear. I do have to say, however, speaking of being a dipshit, how do you not know what a whip is? Like even I know that. I mean, if we're
Well, I do
talking about
now.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
if we're talking about like Riz and Sigma and some of these other terms that the kids are throwing out these days, like that stuff goes over my head. But I thought that whip was well established. But
Yeah, no,
teach
that
the
I definitely knew what a whip was like a couple years ago now. But I joked with her this year. I was like, "Wow, what's a whip, honey?" And she was like, "Dad." I'm like, "I'm joking," but like
yeah.
literally a couple years ago when that first came out, I'm like, why did they call a car a whip?" And actually, I learned it from Beast Mode, Marshawn Lynch. He had a song called
Oh, okay.
"Ghost Ride the Whip,"
Yeah.
and
If you're gonna learn, you got to learn from the best.
right, exactly, my guy from Seattle. All right, man. Well, bring me inside the Matt Green huddle. You're either the quarterback or the general manager. I'm guessing your wife's the general manager in most great marriages. I hate
Yeah,
to.
she's the board of directors. Yeah.
So bring me inside the huddle. Tell me a little bit about the family dynamics, and then I'd love to learn how you and your wife met.
Yeah, God, where to begin? So, family dynamics, God, it's pretty simple and straightforward. I mean, we only have one child, our son Liam. My wife Tabitha, we met um, during the end of my second year, the end of her third year at Seattle U. Met at a party, and yeah, we've been together ever since. Got married young, so I'm 42. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary back in May of this year. So yeah, so we've been together for a while. And yeah, family dynamic. I mean that pretty broad. I mean, what if you could give me a little bit of direction, like, hey, you'd like to learn more about this or that,
Yeah,
lest I'm just going to ramble all day long about stuff that neither you nor anybody listening is going to care about.
rambling's sometimes good. You'd be surprised, but I'll put up the bumpers. I always like to learn, like, tell us a little bit about Liam, and if like things he's interested to, kind of what does a day in the life look like for the Green household, and if there's a story of how you and your wife met at that party that the audience might find interesting, go ahead and feel free to share.
Yeah, no, I'll start with a story. So we're at a party that that I was not planning on going to because it was towards the end of the year and studying, and plus I'm just not like a party person in general. A couple of my friends convinced me to go. She was there. She was heavily inebriated. The first thing that she did, and I never met her before, she had just come up and kissed me. So I'm like, okay, well, it's going to be going to be a halfway decent night. The trick has been just, keeping her inebriated for the past, 25 years to make sure
It's a
that
long
she
buzz.
remains around. Yeah. But no, that's how we bet. And, we just kind of hit it off from there. Liam, yeah, what to say about Liam? I mean, he is, what when you think of, and again, this will sound like I'm bragging, but to be clear, I don't think that I play really any hand in this. He's just an all-around good kid, and he does well in school. He plays a handful of sports. He's one of those kids that's not great at any sport, but he's average to slightly above average at a few of them. Soccer being the one that he's stuck primarily with, but he's not going to get a scholarship, for any of the sports that he plays, but, he remains active. He reads a lot. But he has this really great group of friends. He seems to be extremely popular in school because they keep voting him class president. I think he was, yeah, last year was his fourth year of being
Nice.
elected class president. Again, all while just, does well in school. Like I said at the top, he's not he's not more trouble than I presume any other 11 just turned 12-year-old boy is in this day and age. I mean, so again, he's perfect. So when circling back to the top about gratitude, I know that I'm extremely grateful for that because I know from friends that I have, or just in my travels in general, that some people that they deal with more challenges with their kids in different areas of their lives, and I like to think that so far we've been fortunate enough to not have to deal with many of those challenges.
No, I love it, man. That's something to really be grateful for. I definitely, when you said that, made me think about friends I have in my life where um, they didn't do anything different from
Yep.
afar, but they're dealing with some difficult times. I even think about like my family dynamics growing up. Like you got, one child does this, one child does that. Like from afar, parents did the same thing, but is it maybe how
Right.
we're wired? I don't know. I think,
Yeah,
uh,
I'm a big that's why I mentioned before I don't take any credit for this. I'm a big believer, and to be clear, I'm not a lot of things. Last thing I am is a scientist or a geneticist, but I think that kids are who they are, right? By and large, and parents. I mean, to use the term that you threw out a few moments ago, you could put bumpers, right, in different areas, but they're going to be who they're going to be. And yeah, I mean, I'm one of three brothers. We're all wildly different. My younger brother, right below me, I'm the second oldest. He, by, well, not my son's age, but maybe a couple years ahead of my son, like, yeah, he was getting arrested. He was getting expelled from school, right? So, my parents and him had to deal with a lot of challenges. And as you mentioned a moment ago, it's not like, he was the third of four boys. My parents didn't dramatically raise him different in the same household, that they did for any of my other brothers. It's just, people turn out differently.
yeah, I have a family member that we married into. Like one of them was a like you know B stud executive, high up in law enforcement, and then his brother has been in the big house for like 40 years.
Yeah.
It's like, what in the hell? Makes no sense. But
Yeah. It happens. It's a roll of
yeah,
the dice.
well, I've not gone to the big house yet, and I don't want to, and I hope you don't spend any time in the future either. Let's just
Yeah.
get that out there now before people start thinking we're in jail, like doing this interview from the big house, which we're not. Um, Okay, so Tabitha, I love the fact that you threw her said that she was just completely blitzed when you first met, and that's fantastic. I can only imagine. My wife was I don't she not a bit. I was not blitzed because we met in seventh grade. If she was blitzed in seventh grade, that'd be a totally different
Yeah.
interview for a different podcast. But we got married young too. 20. I was 22 as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then yeah, it's crazy. But anyway, well, cool. Well, you mentioned you got three brothers. I always like learning from my guests about what was life like growing up and to talk about the impact your parents had on you now that you're a dad and all these things you're doing. So maybe share what was life like growing up with the three Green brothers, and then maybe share a little bit more about what your mom and dad did.
Yeah, like grown up. Well, like I said, I mean, we're all extremely different. All four of us. My older brother, who's now a teacher and a school administrator. Younger brother below me works in welding, really great with his hands. Youngest brother went to NYU Film School, and now he, for a lot of the trailers that you might watch when you go to the movies, he and his company, they edit, they put together a lot of those trailers, which is really cool. But growing up, yeah, I mean, we all were just again wildly different. We did very different things. The one common thread of connectivity or thing that at least brought us closer together physically and not necessarily in a good way is my younger brother Andrew and I, the one who went through some challenges. There was maybe, God, I'd say a 4 or 5 year period where just every day something would set us off and it'd just be he and I just get into fist fights, right? And in retrospect, it'd be just stupid teenager shit. You walk home and it's like, hey, you're looking at me the wrong way. It's like, all right, well, let's duke it out. Or like, hey, you fouled me too hard in basketball, so let's start rolling around on the driveway. But my parents, they were both working nonstop. My dad started. He barely graduated high school, didn't go to college. Was kind of an old hoodlum. Him and his buddies back when he was growing up. I think it was his mid-20s. Got a job as a bank teller, and then slowly but surely over the course of 40 years, right, worked his way up just in that industry to retire at the age of 65 or so. at a senior level position within Bank of Hawaii. My mom worked for a really interesting company called California Microwave, which was basically like, what you might want to consider a contractor for the CIA and NSA. So, I mean, she had, purview just as a secretary, right? But, she was surrounded by a lot of really cool stuff. But then, later on in life, just kind of bounced around like, hey, I'm going to be a real estate agent. I'm going to do this, going to do that, just as a way to make money, which we didn't really have much of. She did end up getting a job as the secretary to the principal of a small private school where we grew up, which afforded my brothers and I free tuition, which was great. Because, yeah, outside of that, although we had what we needed, we had clothes on our back, food in our belly, all that good stuff, didn't really have much money at all. So if there's one thing that I saw my parents, or that I like to think that I took away from my parents, and I'm hopefully trying to find ways to instill in my son, is just the work ethic and the value of hard work. Because, yeah, I mean, my dad especially was just worked like a madman just to
Mhm.
make sure that my three brothers and I had whatever it was that we needed within reason, of course.
Interesting. So when your mom went to work for the school, was that strategic in the fact that, or did it just like she get the job and like, oh wow, I get this too. This is amazing.
Yeah, more of the latter, just happenstance,
That's
right?
awesome.
And then you fast forward a couple of years, it was not at all embarrassing when her son gets expelled from that school while she works there. But again, that's a different story.
Oh, your mom, she's a saint.
Yeah.
Uh, four boys, and but like think about the patience though, and the forgiveness. I mean, that you ever thought about? You and your brothers ever talked about that, like the power of forgiveness?
Yeah, we did a little bit. So my mom passed it's about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago. And it was very sudden. I mean, it was just here today, gone to tomorrow sort of thing. And I think the suddenness, as does I think any death in a family, right? Especially with parents, would bring siblings together, and you start talking about things that maybe you didn't feel were important enough to talk about before. On the concept of guilt and forgiveness, my younger brother Andrew, who I mentioned a few times before, he took it the hardest, right? And because he had all those challenges, or maybe caused all those challenges to my parents during his teenage years and into his early 20s. But even despite that, they had invested a good amount of time and resources into getting him therapy. Long story short, they realized that he was just depressed for a long time, and as they were able to work through that, he became better, and they had a really great relationship. So they had a really great relationship for 20 years post that troubling period.
Hmm.
But still, I mean, when you lose a parent, especially suddenly, it's natural for everyone, especially my brother, to just internalize like crap, why was I such an asshole? Like, even though we knew we loved each other, I didn't have a chance to apologize, one last time, that kind
Mm.
of stuff. Right. So, situations like that, did provide us, or maybe did force us into a position where we had more conversations around those types of topics. Because absent that, my brothers and I aren't especially close. We see each other occasionally on holidays, or we'll text each other on each other's birthday, but outside of that, we don't maintain really close ties with each other for no good reason whatsoever. It's just not emotion that we ever settled into.
Yeah. Do you wish it was different?
um I do sometimes. Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I don't think about it a lot, but on the
Hmm.
other hand, when someone like you asks me the question, it's like, yeah, sure, because what would be the downside of
Hmm.
being closer with my brothers, and by extension, having my son be closer with his cousins, for
Hmm.
instance.
Yeah, I ask. I mean, I have a sister, and we're not super close. We were great growing up, but just I mean, we could talk about two different peas in a pod. Like we couldn't. There's so much we're alike. I mean, like we both can quote pretty much every line of Caddyshack, which is a useless skill, but a very great skill to have in life.
Not useless, just to be clear, but
Thank you.
yeah,
I'm gonna update LinkedIn later today then with that. But but there's so many things I wish that like that the kids don't have, like the aunt. We don't see her close to. We don't see each other often. Same thing. Text on birthdays, text on holidays. Um, and as a dad with a son in college now and a daughter as a junior, they're really close. They snap and text each other all the time, and they goofy personalities. But I hope I mean, as they keep in order, I'm just encouraging them to like, you got one family, and just like embrace these relationships. And I can't want it for them. Just like in business, you can't want it for your teams, but they have to. So I try to like ask the right questions to like create this future state of what I want them to realize, which is, with more, obviously more mature than them, but like thinking about like, hey, you got aunts and uncles and vacations maybe, and when she turns 21, you're going to be there to support her, or if she goes and plays hoop, or he goes, whatever he is. I'm hopeful that my kids are closer than me and my sister, just 'cause I think with relationship, usually nothing, if they're good relationships, those are good things that have in life.
yeah.
Um, so- but
Yeah, but even if they're not necessarily good relationships, one. So my son again is an only son. We planned on, grandmaster plan was having more than one, at least two. And I remember a friend of mine said something to me. This was right after I had my son, and I was talking with him about, the reasons why, we're, going to essentially kind of forced to stick with one. And he made a good point, tying this all back together to morbid topic, death of a parent. He said, "Hey, I get it," but he's like, my dad just died. I think it was 6 months prior, and he's like, if I didn't have my brother to share that grief with, right, even though he and his brother weren't necessarily close, he's like, it would have been exponentially tougher on me. And and stuff like that. I mean, intuitively, like, yeah, it makes sense,
mhm.
right? Even if there is a lack of a really strong relationship, as the kind that you and I were chatting about before, like, hey, perfect world, everything would be like this. There is still a relationship, right?
Yeah,
That people could potentially lean on.
yeah. I were you made me think of another story. So like I was there. Well, one, I'm sorry about your mom. I've lost a parent too. I know what that's like. Yours sounds like was sudden. My dad was like a slow, like, I hate to use a phrase like a paper cut, but just a slow
You know,
uh, declining health from really for my whole married life. And my dad finally passed away in December 29th, 2021, of a rap sheet of stuff. But I was there for his last breath, and I'm grateful for that. And I sometimes I worry for my sis because she was not there. She
yeah,
didn't want to come up. She was for a multitude of reasons, but I think those are one of those things I mean, I don't want it. Everyone's got their own decisions to make, but like, dealing with, my dad had dementia and Alzheimer's. And so like trying to reason with the unreasonable at times. And, you know, I mean, at one point my dad accused me of stealing all of his money to build our house in 2014,
yeah,
which is not true, everybody. But like having that, to be able to kind of like separate that from like reality, and like, hey, whatever this is, my dad's somewhere in there still,
yeah,
and trying to like just process that was a challenging that. So I'm sure that as we're talking about this, I'm hoping there's a dad or mom that, or someone listening at home that says, wow, that we've gone through similar stuff too. And that's really the big thing when I started this podcast 5 years ago, Matt, was to create space for have conversations that we all got stuff. And as much as, investors, CRO, things I'm doing, like in the end, our kids don't care. Like I'm a
yeah,
big believer that they don't. We as dads sometimes think so because our ego gets in the way. But in the end, it's their writers like, hey, Dad, I'm gonna go to Jackson's, or hey, can we go shoot? They don't want to. Hey, Dad, how was your podcast today?
yeah.
How many books you sell today, Dad? They could give two shits.
Yeah. I can tell you, my son doesn't care. Once in a blue moon, I'll pick him up from school and ask him how his day, and out of the nowhere, I'll be like, hey, so how are your meetings today? I'm like, oh, good, good. Yeah, thanks for asking, right?
Right.
But yeah, outside of that, I'm sure he could care less about what I'm doing and jamming about day to day.
Yeah. It's funny when we worked from home during the COVID shenanigans. I remember I felt like my son and daughter were like almost like my sales manager. They'd be like, "Hey, Dad, how many calls you have today?"
Yeah.
Like, what's with the metrics? Jesus, leave me alone.
Yeah, it's called accountability, right?
Trying my
It starts
best.
early, yeah, and it lasts forever. So you should be
Yeah.
proud of that.
They sent me a report. They said my words per minute typing were down, and they put me in the back
Yeah,
seat of the car and just let me have it.
talk listen, yeah, the talk listen ratio, right? That's good. Yeah, there's room for improvement there. I got to be honest.
Okay, so your pops, you said you learned a lot from his work ethic, and to going from barely graduating high school, not going to college, to a retired executive is pretty cool story.
Yeah.
Um, Describe where do you think that grit and resilience and fortitude came from, and what really kind of resonated with you now that you're a business leader.
I think part of it is necessity, or at least maybe that's, I presume that I'm correct, but I also admit that part of that might just be my projection of it. And I'm sure you probably feel as, that in a very similar way. I mean, when you're a father or parent, it's like you're just automatically handed, in my opinion, blessed, but you're handed this enormous sense of responsibility, right? And accountability. And, let's be honest, if we did want to talk about generational shifts and how people thought about their responsibility in the household, right? My dad was born in 1946. So, he was raised by people who's like, no, I mean, you gotta, like, your number one job as a man is going to be to provide for your family, right? And that, and I'm sure maybe you could tell me, I'll ask the question how you feel about this. I feel as though that's kind of hardwired into me as well, right? And that's proven by the fact that there have been more than one instance in my life where I've been laid off or fired. It's my role at how I bring in income is just suddenly just gone away, right? And what I felt at the time was less about, less being upset at the company or any individual. It's more of a sense of embarrassment, right? Well, fuck, I got this responsibility, right? How am I going to make sure that I'm doing my number one job as a father? Which and by extension father as the male head of the household. And I hate if that sounds like old fashioned, but it's honestly how I feel. um, the responsibility to provide for that household. And to be clear, even though my wife works, she's a great professional, she has an amazing job, she does well all by herself. But this is still, for better or for worse, I still look at this as my responsibility, right? And I think that is a crystallization of what I was able to take away from my dad, because I'm 99% sure he felt the exact same way, either due to how he was wired or again just the ecosystem in which he was brought up, where every male that was born in 1946 in post World War II America, right, it was like, no, this is your number one job when you get married and have the family.
Yep. Yeah, I think I definitely agree. And then when you said the word embarrassment, the first thing I thought of was like I think there's how do I want to say this? I think there's ways to like we got to embrace what we're really good at, but also get comfortable what we suck at.
Hmm.
And like I used to get really embarrassed at my lack of handyman skills.
Yeah.
I am not handy. I wish I was. I wish I got buddies who can frickin' drywall and sheetrock and fix anything. I mean, I look at it like I'm the guy that puts something together and there's three parts left. I'm like, well, shit, where do these
Yeah.
things go? Throw them over my shoulder. Yeah, the thing still works, but I work my ass off. If we do like like I built an outside shower with a buddy, and once they kind of see what he's talking about, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. But if I'm the guy that's got to go to the hardware store and like build this thing, there's not a chance in hell that thing's going up. I mean, it would.
Yeah.
And I was like, God, what? But I wasn't around that stuff growing up. My dad wasn't. He was kind of handy, but didn't. involved me a lot. Now I'm not like bitter about it, but I wish I was. But I finally kind of gave myself, just, I hate to say the word, almost like grace or forgiveness. Like that's okay to not be good at everything. I'm
Yeah.
barely good at a few things, but like that's one I really suck at. My wife, on the other hand, is really, really handy. My father-in-law is like MacGyver. I mean, he was a pilot, Navy, flew on aircraft carriers, and he just super, super handy dude. And I used to be like, God, one of my kids must think I'm just worthless. But instead of like thinking of the negative, I'm like, hey, let's celebrate Carrie, my wife's skills, and make
Yeah.
the kids realize, hey, honey, just because she's a girl, she's a beast at this stuff. She can fix half stuff more like I can. Like we have a boat. My wife loves driving the boat more than I do. I could have this old school, no, girl, it's my boat. I'm on
Yeah.
a boat, don't you ever forget, to quote my friends at Lonely Island, but like I didn't. And now my daughter loves driving the boat and she's a beast.
Hmm.
And so like, to me, it's like, that's where I feel like, I think like this, the head of the household, it's our job to provide. But I think sometimes my opinion, fair or unfair, is sometimes our ego gets in the way
Yeah.
of, and so like, how do we like still take that ownership of like, yeah, we're going to be provide for our family, yet dads, but we also got to check our ego note. Like, so there's sometimes where maybe our wife or our friend or someone else is going to be better at something than us. And how
Yeah.
do we like just kind of let that go?
Yeah, and no, two things. Number one, I'm if you're not handy, I'm probably even less handy. Like, yeah, I was built unlike my brother. Like, I was born without that part of the brain, and also like I didn't grow up around that kind of stuff, right? My father was the same way. Like, I couldn't change oil or do any of that crap. Um, but to your other point, and yeah, to be perfectly clear, what I said before, as far as I feel my responsibility, head of the household, there is a sense of egotism in that, right? And to be clear, on the one hand, I'm saying like it's not that my wife could not do that, right? She could, and I know that intuitively. If you ask me, like, yeah, of course she could do that. Doesn't mean that my ego, which for I was going to say for lack of a better term, but it is probably true, does not prevent me from still feeling that way, right? And those, it's something that I do actively try to work on, but at the same time, if I'm being honest with myself, I don't think it's ever going to go away. I think that like that just through the way I was raised, and again going back to the way that I'm wired, plus seeing my dad like that, is always going to be something that is permanently hardwired within me, for better or for worse.
Well, I think, but you've used it to your benefit. I mean, I think that you've used it to help, whether it's, like you talk about, you have a job loss, a surprise, whatever it may be. Well, you gotta compete. That's where your grit and resilience come from. Having the mindset of almost like for me, it's like a chip on my shoulder. Like, it's just constant. I think we talked about before we even recorded, was like the power of curiosity. To me, being curious and a curious person keeps me grounded to always, there's always someone smarter than me. There's always someone better than me. There's always a better dad. So like, be curious why, like what, we'll find out what they're doing that I'm not, and not that I'm not like, not comfortable in my own skin, but it's like, it's just a striving of like, you never want to be the smartest in the room.
Yeah,
I mean, my son and I talked about that this recently. He's on a college. He's playing golf in college, and he's around kids now that are like really, really good. Like, and one of his roommates, one of the biggest match play events in the state of Oregon, he finished like this. It's this grueling like 5-day event. The last day is 36 holes, and he finished second. He almost won the thing. Kid got a hole in one in this 36 hole match play event yesterday, and I'm like, this is, I keep telling myself, like, this is what's about, dude. Like, you're now around people that are gonna, like, iron sharpens iron.
yeah,
It's like, so, uh, yeah. I mean, I think we could take this conversation like forever, because it's like that stuff. It's just fun to think about, because I think dads, I hope if you're listening or taking notes like I am, these are this is what I'm hoping to create space for. And you don't need a microphone and our friends at Zencaster uh, to have these conversations. It takes just time. Time is one of our best assets. And shout out to Todd Capone. Todd writes about that in his book, Transparent Sales Leader. I love the fact that time is, it's all we got. We got 1,440 minutes a day. It's, no one gets more, no one gets less. And so as dads, to slow down, do you think about what Matt and I talk about, or to find out ways to be more present? Um, whether it's one less phone call, one less email, to be more with your kids, or vice versa. Maybe sometimes you got to do the opposite. To like to Matt, what you were saying about, if there's days you got to provide and compete and do what you got to do, then go do it.
Yeah. Have you, on that note about time, have you read or heard of the book 4,000 Weeks?
Uh-uh.
Okay.
Writing it
So
down.
4,000 weeks, this will blow your mind. If you live till the age of 85, that's how long you have from birth to death, 4,000 weeks. It's not a lot of time, right? When you frame it that way, just, 4,000 weekends, right? Maybe put it into a little bit more of a microcosm. Yeah, so that book, which I read, I think maybe about 18 months ago, really helped reframe my thinking as far as exactly like we said, like what is most important, right? Because the extra 10 minutes that you spend writing that last email after 5 o'clock in the evening permanently and infinitely closes off any other avenue, right? That you could have had if you
Yep.
had done something else during that 10 minutes, up to and including spending time with your kid or one of your kids doing something else. Don't have to go into a whole thing about it now, but and the book wasn't necessarily meant to be geared towards parents. It's meant to sort of deflect and move people away from the whole time hacking phenomenon. Like, hey, we can 5 minute increments, do this, that, and the other thing. It's more of a philosophical overview of choices that you make throughout the day and the ramifications, both positive and negative, of those choices as it relates to work, as it relates to parenting, as it relates to anything that you do. So after you get done reading Todd's book, maybe pick up 4,000 Weeks, because it's a pretty interesting read.
I wrote it down, and to hold me accountable, I will follow up you afterwards to let you know what I
There you
think.
go. Yeah.
How you just described the book made me think of a book called something very similar called The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar.
It's like kind of like he talks about like this, there's a fork in the road, and every day, every decision you got's a fork in the road.
Yeah.
And for the older dads, you might remember this, the Choose Your Own Adventure books. When I was a kid, you read this, you jump to page this. It's like it's very similar. Like if you work out in the morning, if you have maybe a smoothie instead of 6 donuts,
Yeah.
weird. Your belly isn't as big in 2 weeks. Those types of things. But I love books like that. One thing I want to talk about, I remember before when we recorded, you had once said that you and your wife and family have a passion for travel.
Yes.
Talk about, because I think what I thought was interesting that I think some dads at home might learn is like, yeah, you guys travel, but you got some creative ways you go about um, leveraging your travel experiences.
Yeah. So we do love travel, and this is and going a step further, we love traveling, or at least I love traveling, and I'm sure my wife does too, with our son, right? And part of that was me sort of overcorrecting for the fact that I didn't have the chance to travel anywhere until I was 30, right? Because, growing up, we didn't have any money, we didn't go anywhere. When I went to school, we could only afford one plane ticket for me. So, my parents didn't even, come with me to drop me off to college, that kind of thing, which was all paid by student loans, of course, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, I mean, so when my wife and I traveled on our own outside the country when I was around 30, 30 or 31, she was pregnant with Liam at the time. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. We should do this more. And hey, I want to overcorrect for the fact that I didn't have a chance to do this by making sure that we took our son anywhere and everywhere. Right. So we've been fortunate enough. You look at our passports, we've been to 23 countries since he was born. He's been to 22 of
Wow.
them. I made the mistake of leaving him with my parents, I think, when he was like 8 or 9 months old. And, my wife and I went on a trip and I couldn't stand it the whole time. I'm like, shit, we got to get back. I mean, what am I doing here? Um, but yeah, we understand that we're fortunate enough to be able to do that. But to your point, um, the way I found out how to do this was just by hacking and leveraging credit card points, right? So, all the travel by and large is basically free, right? The hotels, the flights, all that good stuff. And all that we pay for is food and, whatever we decide to do whenever we get to where we're going. But yeah, it's been more than a tradition. It's been something that we do on an annual basis, 2 to 3 trips per year, to different countries, different cultures, and making sure that my son, number one, just has that experience, and is able to be a part of all that. But number two, especially on the cultural front, making sure that he gets to experience different types of environments, different types of cultures, to hopefully make him a much more well-rounded human.
I love that. Well, I think it's cool that you just for everybody at home. You kind of grounded me. You made me think of the points guy. It's someone on Twitter.
Yeah,
I think the people. It's
yeah,
you don't just because you don't have X money. There's still creative ways to go about traveling and start somewhere. And I think it's my wife is very frugal and she's very smart with travel and she gets very similar to what you just said. She does it kind of like for us. I'm like, God, how did you figure that out? And it just kind of like keeps creating these opportunities. I'm curious. So 23 countries. How when you guys think about planning the next trip, how often is it almost like a fantasy draft? Like, you know, Liam's up and he gets to say, or how do you guys go about deciding where you want to go?
yeah. It's so this has turned into. I have very few hobbies, right? This has turned into like a big hobby of
Hmm.
mine, where if like I'm spending time outside of work and everything else, like, hey, I'm just gonna poke around and plan some trips because I get a kick out of it. And again, I know that this is going to sound terrible and a sign of our privilege, but again, see above credit card points, we pay for literally close to none of this. But we're reaching a point where we're starting to double up on places because when you put together the list of like, hey, here's all the places that we want to see, with a few exceptions, we've seen all of them, right? The one big one that we haven't done yet that my son really wants to go to is Japan. But yeah, I mean, I'll ask him. I'll ask my wife, like, hey, where do you want to go? They're like, I don't care. Like, just go, go plan it. My wife, there will be trips where she doesn't know where we're going until like a few days before. It's because she's like, nah, I mean, Matt takes care of all that. I mean, I know that we're leaving this day and we're coming back this day, and I've taken vacation time at work, but she'll come to me 48 hours before the flight. I was like, where are we going? Again, it's like, oh, we're going here, here, and here. But yeah, I'll
Wow.
always solicit their feedback, but they've proven to be close to zero help. Every time I ask them, it's like, fuck it, I'm just gonna pick where I think we're all gonna enjoy. And so far, we haven't had a place where we've come back and it's like, ah, that was kind of a crap trip, right? We've been lucky so far.
Tell me your favorite place you've gone so far.
My favorite place has been Jordan. Yeah, we went to Jordan when my son was about 5, and yeah, we loved it. Great culture, some of the nicest people that we've ever met. Especially, and a lot of people might have misconceptions about that part of the world, and understandably so. Um, Especially as an American, we were treated extremely well, and as an American with a young kid, I mean, there would be times where we'd walking down the street and random strangers would come and like pick up my son. And of course, me is like, nervous American. I'm like, what the fuck, put down my son. But
We're taking them.
yeah, they're like, no, they pick him up, they pinch his cheeks. I was like, thank you for coming to our country. Like that kind of stuff. That was mine. And if you ask my son, Liam, that would probably be a tie between Jordan and we went to Iceland about a year ago, and
Wow.
just the otherworldly nature of that, and just being out in nature the entire time. He really enjoyed that.
Wow. That's so cool. I mean, I think I'm sure you probably know it now, but yeah, as gets old, you'll be so grateful you did this. And we have that in common too, with that we didn't have a lot of money growing up. Our vacations were camping. The one, I think I went on 2 plane rides before I got married. Um, And it's one thing I worry about as a dad is, I don't worry is the right word. I'm very cognizant of it, is making sure I'm reminding my kids that we've been able to travel a lot more than that. And I'm very,
Yeah.
they call it privilege, call it luck, whatever you want to call it. I'm very grateful for that. And I always tell my friends or my buddies or sometimes work people, like, I don't want my kids, I don't want them to know that's normal. And that's what we talk about, gratitude and humility a lot in our family. Like, hey, this is hard work and we got right place, right time, get able to afford this stuff. And when you get married, you're not starting out like we're starting out. You're going to start out with, like, you might be minimum wage someplace. You might, hopefully a little bit higher than that, but maybe you're not. And if the life that we've given you, if it's something you've enjoyed, well, there's a lot behind the scenes that got us to this point. And the more we're here to answer questions as you guys get older and you want to learn how mom and dad did it, we're more than happy to share. But I think it's cool that you already have a kind of probably a built-in story. Like you might be able to afford it, but you're still doing creatively ways to go about still getting the travel done, which I think it's a really, really cool thing you guys are doing.
Yeah. It's a means to an end, if nothing else.
Yeah. All right. Well, I know we're getting close on time here. One of the questions I was like asking dads is an area of your dad game that maybe you don't quite like where it's at, but you're willing to look yourself in the mirror and say, "Hey, man, Matt, we got to get better at this." Tell me an area of your dad game where you're working hard to become that ultimate quarterback or better leader of your home.
Yeah, I think that I run, help run a business, takes up a lot of time. There are times where I don't lead by example and can't be distracted when I'm meant to be spending time around my son. And I have been making a conscious effort to get better at that. And I think that I have, but there's still plenty of room of opportunity for improvement. And another thing is, and I was reminded of this recently. As my son has gotten older, and as I mentioned before, he's 12. I'm starting to, I would start to get the feeling as though he doesn't need, his old man. He doesn't need, his mom as much as he used to. And to be clear, he doesn't. Um, but it's not binary, right? It's not like, okay, preteen team, like, that they're not interested in being around mom and dad anymore. They want to do their own thing. As I was reminded of this recently, and again, on the one hand, I don't like that this made me feel, better about myself, but it did, if I'm just being honest, with two situations. Number one, when we were traveling relatively recently, we're staying in an Airbnb, and in bed, two different bedrooms, of course, for my wife and I and my son. My son got up in the middle of the night, and it's like pitch black in his bedroom. He's trying to find the door to get out and go to the bathroom, and he couldn't find it because he's not used to the room and it's pitch black. So he got a little bit freaked out. He was 11 at the time, or just about to turn 11. So we hear this pounding on the wall, and he calls like, "Dad," I'm like half asleep, so I wake up like, what the hell is going on? And he pounds again, and he's like, "Dad." So I go in the room, check on him. He's a little bit freaked out. And again, I don't know if this is ego or something, but the fact that he called for his dad,
Yeah,
not his mom, right? Not that I don't want him to call for his mom, but the fact that he called for his dad, not once but twice. It's like, yeah, I need my old man to kind of protect me.
yeah,
Or if I'm scared, like, yeah, I'm going to go to my old man, like that. In a weird way, that kind of meant a lot to me. And then
sure,
recently he was at a sleepaway camp for a couple weeks. And, because he's 12 now, whenever he's around his friends, I can't even drop him off at school. I got to drop him off like 4 blocks away so he can walk so that no one gets sight of me. So, he's away at sleepaway camp for 2 weeks, no contact. He's just out in the woods. We go to pick him up, and I'm usually good about when he's in front of his friends. Like I'll give him, the handshake, and then, the bro hug, which is what he likes doing. So, I saw him, he's coming out for the first time. All of his friends are around. So I go to give him the handshake and the, the little the quick bro hug thing. And, he starts giving me a big hug. I'm like, oh, yeah, good to see you too, buddy. And then as I was going to like, hey, I don't want you to get embarrassed. Like, we don't have to hug anymore. He wouldn't let go. And I realized he was crying. And at first, I'm like, you sad to leave your friends? I mean, you're upset because your mom and dad are here, because he would stay there all summer if he wanted to. And, he said, like, no, I just missed you. And he was just sitting, like, holding on to me in front of his friends, just crying for a good few minutes.
Wow.
And I don't like my son crying. I don't like him being upset. But if I'm being honest with myself, again, as he's turning 12, going into this transition into his teenage years, when I'm thinking, like, hey, my son's not interested in his old man anymore. It's not true,
Yeah. No, I
right?
love it, man. Those are the stuff. That type of emotion I celebrate. I think that's great. And I mean, that's what you want, man. Raw, and it's crying's normal, I think, and crying's healthy. And saying I want my kids to say I love you so much every day. I mean, my daughter's almost getting her license in 2 days. She drove to school. I gave her a hug. I jumped in her car, jumped in her whip, then drove
Yep.
home. Um, I love that. Well, I know we're short on time here. I want to make sure we give you time, and I want to make sure everybody, specifically me, we learn, and our guests, and our listeners, tell us about Sales Assembly. How can they find you? How can they learn more about the business, and really who is it for?
Oh, yeah. No, thanks for asking. Sales Assembly, what we do is we provide all the day to day skills training for the go to market teams, sales and post sales of B2B software companies. Work with a few hundred of these companies today. We just train all the AEs on how to get better at negotiation, and train the CSMs at how to get better at multi threading within accounts. And, Keith Waitman, who you mentioned before, his company Bullhorn is one of our longtime clients. So, we have fun working with him and his team. They could always find out more about what we do at salesassembly.com. And I do highly encourage anybody and everybody to connect with me on LinkedIn. Would love to meet any fellow dads or non-dads out there, of course, just any listeners that might want to bridge a connection and hop on a call and get to know each other, because that's what I'm about.
Love it. Make sure you follow him. His content's fantastic. Everybody I know that's coming across or work with Sales Summit, they rave about him. So please make sure you guys check these folks out. We are short on time, but I do got to go through the lightning round real quick.
Yep.
So this is your job. Answer these questions as quickly as you can. My job is try to make you giggle.
All right. Fair
Okay.
enough.
True or false? Your next trip is to Uranus.
False.
False. We're not going there. Okay. If there was to be a nice dinner that you're going to cook for me tonight, I'm coming to Chicago. What are we going to have?
Steak and butter cake.
Okay, it sounds really good.
Yeah.
Favorite comedy movie is?
Oh, crap. God, that's a tough one. I know that this is meant to be a lightning round. I got to say, and if we're talking about the original time that we saw it, Borat, the original Borat, just cracked me up. Right.
Solid.
Yeah.
Okay. Will Ferrell or Vince Vaughn? Who you watching?
Vince Vaughn.
Okay. Chicago guy. Makes sense. If there was to be a book written about your life, tell me the title.
Don't take life too seriously. You're not getting out of it alive.
Okay, love that title. Now, you are the casting director in Hollywood. Netflix, Hulu, YouTube, they're all fighting for it. I need to know who's going to star you in this critically acclaimed hit new movie.
Fred Savage, due to the physical resemblance. Yeah,
Freaking Wonder
that's a
Years,
must.
baby. He
Yeah.
is the Wonder Years of Chicago, the Wonder Years of Sales Academy. Lightning round's over. We both got a little bit of a giggle. We'll call it a tie. This has been a blast getting to know you, Matt. I'm so thankful for your time. I'm so grateful for the conversation. I know this is not the last time we're going to talk. I can't wait to meet you in person when our paths do cross. Thank you for all of our dads supporting us each and every week. Thank you for our sponsors for your continued support of the Quarterback Dadcast. And again, keep doing what you're doing, brother. And grateful again for Keith introducing us to each other.
Yeah, it's the first time he's ever done some right with his life. So I appreciate him, and I appreciate you having me on, Casey. And thank you for all you do.
You bet.